My name is Jerome Ferry and my cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing a video interview with a Mr. Robert Yaw, a lifelong resident of Cedar Rapids and past owner and president of Souvenir Pen and Pencil Company. Bob, can you tell us when and where you were born?
Yeah, right here, 1913, December 20th, at my grandparents' home, which was on 2nd Avenue and 12th Street. And I've been here ever since, except for 2.5 years, all expense paid, to a beautiful tropical South Sea island called New Guinea.
What was your parents' names?
Harry and Edith.
Mm-hmm. And did you? And what school did you go to here?
Well, I started at Johnson School on Washington Avenue on 17th Street and 18th Street, and I went from there to Franklin. I was in the first class at Franklin after it was built, and along with a lot of these other fellows we talked about. And then from there to Old Washington High School, which had a rich history of people. And then I graduated from there. They had 2 graduations a year, one in January and one in May. And I was in the January class. And my dad didn't want me to be idle for the semester in between there. And so I enrolled at Co for a semester and then transferred down to the university because Co didn't have the business administration courses that I wanted.
Yeah. What was your dad's occupation?
He traveled for Eastern Coal Mining Company, and he had all of Iowa and part of southern Minnesota. And he called on, in all the small towns, not much in the big cities, but in most every small town in those days, there was a cooperative dairy, and they had big boilers because they used steam in making butter and that sort of thing. And he sold them the coal. And then in those same small towns, there'd be a lumber yard that also handled coal, and the coal would be their business in the winter and lumber in the summertime.
Mm-hmm. Did his job take him away from his family quite a bit?
My dad apologized to me many times that he was awfully sorry he couldn't be a full dad, but his work took him. Every Monday morning he'd get on the streetcar at Beaver Avenue and go down to the railroad station, and if you remember Music Man, that was his life, along with a lot of other salesmen. They'd get on a train down there. It was a freight train with a couple of passenger coaches on the back for the salesmen. And they'd get on, and it just became a club. Every Monday morning they all got on the train. The train made every stop. First stop would be Vinton. They'd drop off a few of their freight cars. And while they were doing that, the fellows would all run up Main Street and do business. And the engineer would blow his whistle when he was going to be back in the station. He was up in the yards dropping off his freight cars. And he'd back down there, and everybody would pack up their order book and run down Main Street, get back on the train, and go to the next town until Friday night and came home.
Was he a fun type guy when he was able to spend some time at home?
Oh, he wrote me a letter every day that he was gone. And every Monday morning I'd get up, and on my dresser was his schedule for the day, what town, or for the week, what towns he'd be in, what hotel he'd be staying at, and the phone number.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
None.
So what did you do as a young boy in Cedar Rapids to get into mischief or stay out of mischief?
Well, I didn't get in very much mischief because I worked. I mowed lawns and took off screens and put on storm windows and painted the house and washed the car and cleaned the gutters and washed the windows and all that sort of thing in the neighborhood. And I did that for a long time. Shoveled the snow.
Okay. How old would you have been when the Depression hit, the 29 and early 30s?
Well, I was born in 13 and the Depression hit in 29. That's it.
So you got a taste of it. You were old enough to get a taste of it. How did it affect your dad?
Well, it
Did he
didn't
get caught
affect
up in it?
Dad's business very much because, you know, you got to keep making the butter and you got to keep heating the house. And that was before oil furnaces or gas. And so every house had a coal furnace in it. And that was kind of like electricity. You couldn't get along without it.
Do you remember? Of course, you remember the trolleys. Did you ever ride the trolleys getting around town?
Oh, sure. Every Saturday night we'd take the trolley downtown and have a bite to eat at Bishop's, which was over on First Avenue where the old Allison Hotel used to be. Then we'd go to the Majestic Theater on 3rd Street and A Avenue. And that was vaudeville. And that was a wonderful experience. Then we'd get back on the streetcar and go home and get off on the corner of 19th Street and Grand Avenue because we'd moved out there by that time. But I had a fun story about that. I was in New Guinea and Merle Holloway, my friend here, had managed to get a bottle of whiskey through the mail, which was hard to do because in the Army post office, if it rattled, it didn't get any farther. But he took it over to the Quaker Oats. Gordon DeLay was manager of Quaker Oats at that time, and I didn't know it, but they put their export oatmeal in tins. So Gordon just marked one of the tins and poured all the oatmeal out except about 2 inches on the bottom, put the bottle in, and the rest of the oatmeal around it, put the lid on, marked it, and when it came off the line, he grabbed it. He didn't hear anything. And it took 3 tries before Merle got that idea. And so I turned down up to $75 for that bottle of whiskey, but money wasn't worth a hoot then, and none of us thought we'd ever get home anyway. And so I said, we'll save it for a special occasion to my tent mates. And after we'd been over there about a year, the special services of the armed forces dropped Oklahoma, the whole cast in on us, and it was monsoon time. And, you know, you were sloshing around in mud. We had absolutely no facilities. And so the colonel asked me, he said, you're kind of ingenious. See what you can do. We don't want to send these people out of here or deny the troops the chance to see it. So I said, well, give me a Jeep and I'll get down to base headquarters, and did. And they had everybody on the island on their computers. And the Seabees, I went to the Seabees first, and they said, well, yeah, we'll do that. And I said, that MacArthur wouldn't let any alcoholic beverages in. None, not even beer, until George Catlett, Marshall, heard about it. And he rescinded that order right now, and a couple of weeks later, New Guinea was awash in beer. And the show came over, and the old peddler in the movie was an old man. He was 73 years old, but he was still a trooper, like those roadshow travelers used to be. And so I said to my tent mates, I think this is a special occasion. We'll wait till the last night of the show, and after that we'll have him over to the tent, and we'll get the whiskey out and milk his experiences a little bit, and we did. And he started by going around, where are you from? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? And then he came to me, and I said, told him I was Bob Yaw from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Ever been in the Majestic Theater? I said, yeah, a long time ago. It isn't there now. He said, yeah, I know. I was on a road show, and I appeared in that theater many times. He said there was a hotel across the street. I can't remember the name of it, but it was the oldest, supposedly the best in town. And I said it was I named the hotel. And he said, yeah, that was it. And he said there was an old man on the desk, night clerk, and he used to do me an awful lot of favors. He said, I can't remember his name. I said it was Schwarzentrooper. It was Art Schwarzentrooper's dad. And he said, how'd you know that? I said, well, he was the father of a friend of mine. And he said, well, it is a small world. He said, there was also a lady, I think she was a Greek, had a flower shop over on 3rd Avenue. I said, Mrs. Lapes. And he said, that was it. How'd you know her? Well, I know her. Well, he said, I hope she isn't there now. He said, I would owe her about $1,000. He said, I had a babe there, and every time I was in, I'd have a date with her, and I'd have to take a corsage course, and I never paid for any of them. I was gone before the bill came around.
Oh.
And he got to reminiscing about that. It just happened to have a lot of overlap.
Here you were on the end of the world, and you were on a personal relationship with somebody you just stumbled across.
In the middle of New Guinea. Oh, I had another one. I got a bad skin disease over there, and they didn't have any dermatologists. And but they found on a computer one in the center of the island. And so the doctor was treating me. He said, we'll go in there, because he said, we don't know how to handle this here. And it's getting out of hand. So we went in there with my records, and this doctor took a look at him. He says, Bob Yaw, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Did you ever know Larry Halpin? He was a dermatologist here.
Bob, do you remember your dad's first automobile? Did he have a...
Well, of course, he traveled by train for a long time. But yeah, the first automobile was a Model T.
He had one before you did.
Before I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have one until after I got out of college.
College, okay.
Yeah.
And his was Model T. Did you take any road trips with them?
Well, we'd take rides on Sunday.
Yeah. Did you ever go to the Seedling Mile?
To the what?
Seedling Mile, east of, or this side of Mount Vernon.
Oh, yeah.
The strip of pavement.
Yeah, the first pavement laid in the state.
Understand that people used to drive out there on Sundays just to drive back and forth.
That's right. Yeah.
How about Hunter Airport? Do you have any memories of the old Hunter Airport?
Oh, yeah, Dan Hunter. We didn't have any flights out of here, but he would charter any businessman or anybody else needed to be flown someplace. That was the only place you could go to get a ride. And he had a makeshift hangar out there and so on. But he was a colorful man and wonderful experiences about his flying. And then one day, Otto Cole, who had Chick Bed, the name of a company over here on the river at F Avenue. And Chick Bed was a chalk-like product that he happened to discover out in Wyoming when he was out there on other business. And what's this? And they told him what it was. And he says, there's a lot of it here. Oh, acres and acres and acres. It's down about 4 feet. We mine it. He said, give me some. And he brought it back, and he got in touch with some of the proper authorities, and they decided that would be a wonderful bedding for a chicken house because it was so absorbent. And that's hence the name Chick Bed. And he was very successful, and he had an area company plane. And Dan Hunter would have one of his pilots flying wherever he wanted to go, and he overheard me say I was going to Chicago one day out at the country club. And he said, "You're going to Chicago tomorrow?" And I said, "Yeah." He was a big man with a squeaky voice. He said, "Well, I'm flying in tomorrow. You want to ride with me?" I said, "Sure." So we went into that old airport just offshore downtown Chicago. It only had one runway, north and south. If there was an east and west win. It was a whale of a job for the pilot to get in, but we did. And he went to do his business, and I did mine. We met back there and got in the plane and started home. And I was in the back seat snoozing. I heard Otto let out an oath to the pilot. That damn needle isn't even wiggling. No, it's all right. Don't worry about it, Otto. He said, well, I think that's the gas gauge. And, yeah, but we'll make it. He said, well, you were supposed to get filled up there. Well, he said there was a babe in the hangar there, and they're going to have a fly-in breakfast out in Cedar Rapids next week. And so I was just lining up some stuff with her, and I forgot about it. So the next thing I knew, we crossed the Mississippi, and I didn't know how far, but I figured I'm here and I can't get out and walk. And the next thing I knew, we were down, making a landing right in an apple orchard. The trees were going by, and we pulled up to the farmhouse. And Otto was so scared he didn't say anything until he got stopped, and then he let out a lot of oaths. And the pilot got out, went up, farmer, and came out with 5 gallons of gas and poured it in and backed through the orchard. I figured if he can do that with a plane, it's pretty safe because you can almost find a place to land like that anymore.
Cedar Rapids have had quite a few floods in their history. Is there any particular ones that stuck out in your mind? You had any experiences with the Cedar Rapids flooding?
Well, I never, yeah. In I think it was 29, we had the big flood. And I wasn't at Souvenir then. I was still in college. But there were rowboats and canoes going up and down F Avenue. And there used to be a Russell's Ice Cream Company over there on E Avenue and 2nd Street West. And it's gone now, but there used to be a painted mark on the wall of Russell Ice Cream Company. That was the height of the flood in 29, and it was, about as high as that picture is off the wall. And I was talking with people at Souvenir, and I said, what'd you do? And they said, it went through here desk high. And we took 30 loads of muck out of the basement after it went down. As a
young boy, did you get to go to a lot of Saturday matinees at the movie houses? Or
no. My father wasn't wealthy at all. He made a respectable living, but we went to, Mother and I didn't go out at all, but on Saturday nights we'd all go down to the Majestic. Then as I got older, we'd have a date and go to the movie. But we didn't have the Isle or the Paramount. We had the Strand and the Isis and a few like that.
How about the Cherry Sisters? Were they performing in your
I never saw them, but yeah, they had a lot of tomatoes.
Any parks stick out in your mind in Cedar Rapids as you growing up as young?
Oh,
Beaver Park, or
as I said a few minutes ago, we had moved 19th Street and Grand Avenue, and Mother was a great outdoors person, and she loved the winter time. And we'd go for a walk when I was 4 or 5 years old, and not in school, and we'd walk out Grand Avenue to Beaver Park. And as you got close to the park, there was a sort of a sand hill there, and she'd go over and stand in front of it and fall down backwards with her arms out, and then she'd do that and get out of it and say, now you lay down and carve your own angel out of the snow. And we had a lot of fun with that.
Do you recall what was known as Carnival Week in Cedar Rapids? Was there a special week that was set aside for
Well,
services?
it was in the summertime. There was always a Carnival Week, and they were carnivals with the barkers and all that sort of thing. No animals. But Ringling used to go through here. And when Ringlings went through, there was always a parade downtown with all their animals and the calliope and all that sort of thing. Then they'd end up down about, 12th Avenue, which hadn't been built up then. And that's where they pitched the tents. And Mother'd take me down to see the parade. And then the next morning, very early, we'd go down and watch them set the tents. And that was quite a sight because there was a team, and they had to have posts about that big around, and they had to be driven about 4 feet in the ground so that the wind wouldn't take it down. And that was just like a quartet. There was 4 guys that stand around that post and take turns. They never missed a beat. But we kids used to sneak in under the tent once in a while, and the folks didn't know about it. But we could just, if we didn't get caught, you could stand under the bleachers and see a good part of the service.
Did you ever recall a little gallery?
Oh yeah.
What was that?
That's all right. It was run by a lady by the name of Hazel Brown, and she had extremely good taste. And it really wasn't a gallery; it was a gift shop. But she had elegant, not necessarily expensive, but very, very tasteful, all kinds of things, lamps and so on. And it was the gift shopping center of the town for a while, because Killian's and Armstrong and so on didn't have those kinds of things.
Do you know her name? You recall her name?
Helen Brown.
Helen Brown. Okay. When did your folks expose you to the Cedar Rapids Symphony, the orchestra, when you were young?
We didn't have much of a symphony then. I was on the early symphony board. The symphony was started by a Dr. Crawford, who had 2 sons who also became doctors. But Dr. Crawford was a very classical man, and he loved symphony music, and we didn't have a symphony. And he said, well, it's high time, so he gave some money, and they got people from Cole and whoever could play an instrument, and he was one of them, and he played in the first symphony, and it was pretty respectable. And then it grew, and we got the Paramount Theater as the hall, and everybody knows it's a great success today and highly respected. It's been written up in Time Magazine and New York Times.
Grant Wood. Did you know Grant?
Yes, I did. He was an extremely interesting and jovial fellow, but he didn't have any money. And Dave Turner got to know him and liked him and saw some of his work, and he was pretty impressed with it. And he said to Marvin, you ought to sell these things. Nobody wanted this stuff. He said, well, I'll tell you what. You aren't getting the right training here. And I'll finance you, and I'll send you to Paris. And you go there to the art school and polish your obvious talent. And I'll buy anything you paint. And he went, Marvin went and came back and set up his studio. Dave gave him the 5 Turner Alley over the carriage house. And that's where he lived, and that's where he did his painting. And Dave just bought anything that didn't sell. Ended up with the largest collection of his painting. And think most of it went to the art.
Holidays, Bob. Did Christmas, was that a fun time for your family?
Oh, great. My mother came from England, and that big time over there. And this was back before Christmas tree lights. And you had a clipper. I don't think either you're old enough to remember, but it was like a clothespin. And it held a candle. And you put the clip it on around the thing and put a candle in it and light it. That was an invitation to a fire. But I read about them, but we didn't, we were very careful about it. But we didn't have a lot of money, so we strung cranberries and made the decorations ourselves. And Mother and I'd decorate the tree and light it every night. And that was a time for gifts, and we didn't have a lot of money for gifts. So Mother knew how to make, everybody raved about her orange marmalade. Well, she learned to make that in England. And the same for her plum pudding. She made real English plum pudding with brandy in it. And I had an old maid school teacher for an aunt. And she'd never eat the plum pudding because she'd get intoxicated.
Was your mother from England?
Oh yeah, born and raised
Born and
there.
raised.
When I was over there quite some years ago, I found the house, 10 Angel Row, Nottingham, and took a picture of it, and she treasured that.
Mm-hmm.
But she had stories to tell. Her mother had been at one time lady in waiting to the Queen in Buckingham Palace. And so Mother had gotten to see a little bit of Buckingham Palace when she was a child. But she had wonderful stories to tell about those experiences. And one time she was saying something about those darn foreigners, and I said, Mother, who are you talking about? Well, these people written up in the paper and so on. I said, you're a foreigner. I am not, I'm British.
How about the 4th of July? Was that a big time for you when you was a kid in Cedar Rapids?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you remember any of them that stuck out in your mind?
Dad wouldn't buy any of the big salutes and stuff. We had Roman candles and pinwheels and these little firecrackers. You'd light off half a package of them. They would pop, 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 you know. But it was a great time. There was always a big parade. It was a very patriotic day, and we kids look forward to it.
Was there any particular part of town they would have a gathering, like any park or anything, or
The
just,
parade?
yeah, or no, the celebration? Did they have celebration in a park or
Well,
something?
the parade was a celebration, but families had picnics and parties in their homes, and everybody made a big occasion of the 4th of July. And I always loved a parade, and I always loved a band music, and I never forgot those. Those were big events, but you know, there weren't a lot of big events. There wasn't any television. We didn't have exposure to the kind of cultural thing you can find on television today with Majestic Theater and Movie House and the holiday circus.
Do you recall the Alamo Park?
The Animal Park?
Alamo.
Oh, Alamo?
The Alamo, yes.
No.
The amusement park
Up on Roosevelt Hill it was.
on Roosevelt Hill.
Well, it wasn't Roosevelt then, but it was on the west side.
It was out by the Roosevelt School.
Yes.
We had a ball team then called the Bunnies,
Funny. Okay.
and that was where their ballpark was, right alongside that.
They used to have a water slide out there. That could have been before your time. You had been too young to remember that, maybe.
I don't remember a water slide. There were slides, shoot-the-shoots we used to call them, and all the parks, Alice and Beaver and so on, swings, merry-go-round.
Would you have been old enough to have any recollection of the explosion at the Douglas Starch Works?
We were having dinner. at our house. Dad was home, and we had a round dining room table. So I guess it didn't seat people maybe. And it just shook the windows in the house, and Dad thought that the furnace had blown up. I don't know how he thought it would blow up, but he rushed downstairs and came back up, and he said it wasn't the furnace. He said that was a big explosion. So we got in the car and went downtown, and the streets were covered with glass. All the downtown, Armstrong's, Killian's, all the store windows were out. And most of the small windows, I'm talking about the big windows the size of the end of this room. There was glass everywhere, and ambulances were running. That was a whopper.
Do you recall, back then there wouldn't be such a thing as plywood, with all of these windows blowing out, what did they just leave them open? Surely they boarded them up or covered them up with something so they
It
wouldn't.
wasn't, well, listen, the glass people kept a few panes like that for an accident. But they didn't have 10% of the need, probably not 5%. And well, they entered emergency orders and that sort of thing, but a lot of those windows, well, they might hang sheets in them and tape them down to shut out the rain and that sort of thing. But they got fixed pretty fast. But just everybody can't set a window glass like that. Seal it.
And I can imagine a lot of that glass had to have been ordered from quite far away too, that heavy.
I don't know how far away the warehouses would be that supplied people like the glass works here, glass companies here. But I don't know if it took a week or 10 days or what it took, but it sure disrupted business life for a while.
Let's move into your early or late teens and when you went off to college, and tell us about your life from there.
Well, my dad always thought that I should work after school on Saturdays, never on Sunday. But as I told you, I mowed lawns and raked leaves and shoveled snow and cleaned gutters and washed windows and in some cases painted a house. And Jennings Crawford, one of the sons of the founder of the symphony, was a neighbor of ours. And he was a wonderful man. He did down his sons. He had two daughters, and one of them whom was handicapped. And he needed a son, so to speak. And I did everything I pointed out and washed the windows and would take his wife to the grocery store or whatever running around she had to do. But he became a great teacher of mine, and one time I asked him why he and his brother, why his dad sent them both to Austria for their medical training. And he said, well, for a very good reason. That was the only country in the world at that time where autopsies were the law. If you died, you had to have an autopsy. And he said that gave them knowledge of the body, the skeleton and all the organs of the body and so on, that nobody else had, nobody in the world. And it became the teaching center of the world for quite a long time. And that's why he sent us there. And they were, one of them was a tremendous surgeon here, and the other was a specialist on digestive tract.
Do you remember? No, I lost my train of thought there. So you went to Cole your first year of
Just
college?
one semester.
One semester.
No, not a year, a semester.
A semester.
From January till June.
Mm-hmm. And then you got
Then I went
drafted.
to Iowa.
When did your military career come in here?
Oh, I had finished college and was the only way I got through college. We weren't poor. We had 3 meals a day and that sort of thing, but there wasn't any amount of income that
Your folks couldn't afford to send you to college?
not entirely. And but they were very good friends of A.L. Killian's. And he stopped me on the street one day and he said, "I understand you're having trouble going to school." And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Well, that's a surprise to me. I understood you were." And I said, "No, I know. I can't go." I didn't have the money. And he said, "Well, I'm not going to give you the money, and I'm not going to loan you the money. But I'll give you a job. And if you aren't in school, you'll be working weekends, summer, Christmas, Easter, holidays." And that was one of the great experiences of my life. He was a great teacher. He, like we all have our weaknesses, his was a temper, uncontrollable, absolutely uncontrollable. And when you talk about a purple rage, his face got purple. And you could have been waiting on the most important customer to the Killian Company, but if you did something wrong, boom, that temper would go off. Well, he had a son, but his son was a playboy. He went to University of Iowa and had a convertible, and he was a playboy. But I wasn't, and A.L. taught me an awful lot. He was a tremendous teacher. He only had an 8th grade education himself, but he had a Marshall Field quality of store. There was the guru of the department store world at that time was a fellow by the name of Amos Parrish, New York, and his clients were like Marshall Field and Rich's in Atlanta and Burdines and all of the great department stores. And I got to know him, and he offered his services as a consultant in A.L. Killian. If he had just remodeled an apartment, spent a lot of money, somebody came along and showed him a better one, wipe it out, put in the best stick. Always did it that way. And Amos Parrish said Marshall Field was damn lucky that A.L. Killian got off the train in Cedar Rapids instead of taking it to Chicago, where he'd have had a wholly different kind of competition, because A.L. Killian was every bit as the same kind of a person that Marshall Field was. We had a Marshall Field quality store here. We had a separate men's store, and we had Oriental rugs and furniture and carpets, as well as ladies ready to wear and accessories and jewelry and menswear, haberdashery, all of that. And then we had a bargain basement, and we had an elegant restaurant on the 3rd floor. It was open every night, and including Saturday nights. Sit-down dinner, or if you didn't like that, they had a sort of a coffee shop downstairs. And one day there was a table of about 12 every noon in the coffee shop. And A.L. Killian was one of them, and Harry Gage, president of Cole College, and Vern Marshall, the editor of the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and people like that were at that table. They were called the horse traders. And I had my lunch, and I was paying for it, and A.L. came by. His temper had never exploded to me, and I'd been there a few years. Right there, boom, in front of, you could hear him all over the place. It was very embarrassing. A fellow named Neil Montgomery, who was the #1 salesman for Northwestern Mutual, was there, and he was checking out at the same time. And he was intimidated by nobody, and he knew A.L. very well. He knew all about his temper. And he came by right at that moment, and he said, "A.L., what are you giving Bob hell for?" "Because he made a mistake." He said, "A.L., do you know where the fella is who never made a mistake?" "No, he's working for somebody who does." That was the end of the temper.
But because of him giving you a job, you were able to work your way through the University of Iowa.
You'll find this hard to believe, but tuition was $45 a semester, but if you didn't have the $45, it might as well have been $4,500. And there were so many kids in the state who were in the same situation as I was, that they put army cots in the field house, and you could stay there. And of course, none of us had a wardrobe or anything. We had our clothes was a laundry box. It was about as big as what they used to put suits in when you bought a suit. It was covered with canvas and had canvas straps, and had a place where you slipped a card in, your home address on one side and your school address on the other, and you put your home address up and put your dirty laundry in it and ship it home, and it'd get washed and come back, and you'd turn the card over and come back to you in Iowa City or wherever you were. And there was a Smitty's Cafe down there where most of the kids ate breakfast. And every morning at 5 o'clock, you could go over there and there'd be a line of 15 or 20 guys in line, hoping that they could get breakfast for washing dishes or setting tables or whatever there was to do. So the depression was real. I lived on $1 a day. You could get a donut and a cup of coffee and a glass of orange juice for $0.25. Coffee was a nickel, and coffee was a dime, and a glass of orange juice. I mean donut, no orange juice. Donut was a nickel. And that was breakfast. And then I could get lunch in the basement of the whatchamacallit center down there for 25 cents, and I could get dinner over at the dorm across the river for 50 cents. So for $1 a day, I could get reasonably well nourished.
So during your college, while going to college, did you have any idea in your mind what you wanted to do with your life?
Yeah.
After you got out of college?
I wanted to be in business, and I had hoped to be an entrepreneur. I don't know where I thought I'd get the money, but anyway, that was my aim, and I got a splendid education, and I think it was only equal to an MBA today, because my dad did something I didn't think he'd ever do. I said, I need you to lie for me, and he said, I don't lie. And I said, well, they have a regulation at school. If you're not a candidate for a degree, you can take anything from the curriculum. You can't take chemistry 2 if you didn't take chemistry 1, or algebra if you hadn't taken advanced math, and so on. But with that exception, you could take everything, and nothing was compulsory. If you were a candidate for a degree, you had to take military training and phys ed. Well, that took credit hours that I couldn't afford, so he lied for me and told me, I was over 21. And I got to then choose my courses, and I got business law and money and banking and labor management and also accounting, all sorts of those things, merchandising. I got advertising out of the School of Journalism, and made friends with some wonderful faculty that were among my best friends for years after I graduated. But A.L. Killian had given me a job, made it possible for me to go, and he said, I got a job for you full time as soon as you graduate. Well, I told him I wouldn't have a degree, but I'd have an education, and I told him this story, and he said, that's good enough. And so I went right from my last class to Killian's in the advertising department. Of course, I'd been working in the store for 4 years. And he rotated me through all the departments, not all the departments, but most of the departments. And I knew the buyers and the personnel. Every department had a buyer. She went to market, or he, in New York twice a year, and spring and fall. And so I knew the business pretty well.
Did you have a title at that time? Did you have a title at that time?
They called me advertising manager.
Did you have anything to do with the fabulous displays they put on at Christmas time? Would that have been?
No, we had window decorator by the name of Luther. He's German, had a thick German accent. Boy, he was fabulous. He had display windows comparable to Marshall Field's. But he made a deal with Marshall Field because they were famous for that Michigan Avenue, or not Michigan, State Street, and anyway, the main corner where Marshall Field was, and it was a huge corner window, big as this room. And that people would go to Chicago to see Marshall Field Christmas windows. Always had a theme. And we made a deal with them. We would get last year's out here. And boy, you know, there'd be people walking along 3rd Avenue almost day and night to see those windows that came in from small towns. A.L. Killian did a lot of good things for Cedar Rapids. He didn't want to let anybody go to Waterloo before it was closed, because it was closer, or Davenport because it was closer. So he made a deal with General Motors, and they would not give him, but loan him about 10 cars, all white sedans. And he got the Chamber of Commerce interested, and in the summertime, all the leading merchants got in those cars and went to Waterloo or Davenport and made a big presentation for Cedar Rapids and what was going on and for the year and all that sort of thing. And we began to pull traffic from, 75 miles. And they'd come in here. And then he thought we needed something else, a traffic builder. And so he got the idea about rodeos, and he began looking into it, and he found out there were traveling rodeo teams, real rodeo, bucking, bronco, and all that, steer roping. And he built what's now where the racetrack is, and it was called Rodeo Park. And he did the whole thing, and he was sure he got the very best stars. And I got to know some of those, the fellows who would outlast on bucking bronco and all that. Then he got the rest of the merchants where it was appropriate for that week, rodeo week. And he got all kinds of publicity, jeepers creepers. People came from 100 miles away to see the rodeo, Cedar Rapids rodeo. And he had 5-gallon hats and cowboy boots and all the paraphernalia, and sold it. And I had to wear a 10-gallon hat, 5-gallon hat. Everybody in the store did during that week. But he made Cedar Rapids the trade center of the state.
How long did you stay with Killian's? How long did you stay with Killian's then?
I don't remember exactly. I finished school in 34, and and I must have been there for about 6 or 8 years. I felt an obligation to him. I really did, because he not only made it possible for me to go, but he taught me a lot.
Did he make you feel that way, though, that you was indebted to him?
No.
He did not.
Never. Not a bit. And so I had opportunities to go elsewhere, but I turned them all down. And one day, Vern Marshall's brother, who was CFO of the Gazette, and a friend of mine, but Killian's were one of the prime customers of the Gazette. We took more space in the Gazette than anybody else in town, Armstrong's included. And he invited me to lunch one day, and he said, I think you're going to give me an argument on this, but he said, Harold Rowe wants you. Well, Harold Rowe owned the Ambro Advertising Agency, but the thing that was unique about it, it was a regional agency, highly respected. We had 5 major public utilities, Iowa Electric Light and Power, Illinois Gas and Electric, Interstate Power and Light, Central State Power and Light, Iowa, Illinois Gas and Electric, all of those. But we also had a brewery in Wisconsin, and we had the Link Bell Speeder, major accounts. Well, he joined with some other fellows who had regional agencies, and we formed the National Advertising Agency Network. So if we had a client who needed some research, market research done in Omaha or San Francisco or wherever, we had an agent, a regional agency there that we knew was very professional, and we'd just hire them to do it. That was a lot better than if we had an office there. And it was an interesting experience. So I said, well, I owe A.L. Killian. He said, you paid A.L. Killian back. I'm not indicating that he would be happy to see you go, but you don't owe him anything, and you always were interested in agency, and here's an agency that wants you. So they hired me as an account executive over there, and that was another great learning experience. And
then when did Uncle Sam put the long arm on you?
I remember the Sunday of Pearl Harbor, and my father-in-law had given my wife and I a honeymoon in Hawaii. And we had, that was December, and we had been there in June. And we didn't realize, and it was Sunday, and her folks were over, and we were all having dinner in our little apartment on First Avenue. And her father kept listening to the radio. There wasn't any TV, and we didn't have it. And he kept saying, boy, this is worse than I first thought. Oh my gosh. The longer it went, he just said, it sounds like we've lost most of our Navy. And we had. And that was an eye-opener for the whole country. And you know what happened after that.
Yeah. And you ended up where? In what branch?
2 years later, I was called, and I went to Camp Dodge and had my basic. Then I went down to Fort Leonard Wood outside of St. Louis and had more training. And then from there, by military train to the West Coast, to a town I didn't even know existed, Pittsburgh, California, which was near San Francisco. But that was the port of debarkation for thousands of troops that were going either to Alaska or the South Pacific. And we were on what they call those boats that converted to freighters after they were Kaiser. But what they really were freight ships made to accommodate troops. We'd have pipes welded to this deck and the overhead, and during 3 hammocks, 3 high, you had to shinny up the post if you had the top bunk canvas, and we ran out of water, so the only way we could get a shower was if we'd look out in the South Pacific rainstorm would come by. Sometimes it would stop before you got the snow or the soap off. But that was an experience. One night we got picked up and illuminated by another ship, and we thought Japanese because there were a lot of them out there. Fortunately, it wasn't, and they had the blinkers, and we communicated, and it was an American ship. So we went on. Then we blew an engine about 2/3 of the way and put into this French island that's been such a controversy with respect to its government, and got it fixed. And it was so bloody hot there that you just couldn't stand it, but nobody could go ashore except a couple of the officers. And we got the thing fixed and went on, then we got to the, and we didn't know where we were going. They wouldn't tell us anything. All our gear was allegedly on board someplace. But we had our winter gear on. And boy, when you got down into the South Pacific heat, you weren't outfitted for that. That was to mislead people, because remember this, loose lips sink ships. And so they'd do anything they could. We thought we were going to Alaska because we didn't knowingly have any other attire. And, but that wasn't where we were going. So anybody from our ship that had loose lips would be talking about going to Alaska, and that wasn't it. We got over there, and, you know, World War I was probably the most massive movement of men and material and everything, war, food, everything. It's amazing that we did as well as we did. If a lot of big-time executives hadn't stepped in and taken $1 a year one-star generals, it wouldn't have been that way. But they organized it for the Army. The Army wasn't prepared for this. Pearl Harbor was a huge surprise and an embarrassment to the Navy. And so we got over there, and we weren't expected. There wasn't anybody to offload the ship, and there weren't any facilities. All we could see was jungle and a beach. So we had to climb down on nets and get into boats. Yeah, they just lowered some nets from the ship. They were emergency ways off the ship, and go ashore when we got there. Finally, the shore support that we should have did show up, and had bulldozers and everything. They began pushing the jungle back, but it was at monsoon time, and mud, you're going to put a tent pole down with your hands, and snakes and monkeys, and it was a shocker to us. But we got our tents up enough to give us some shelter. The only thing we had was sea ration, and you'd stand outdoors to eat it, and you'd take a spoonful out, and the rain would fill the cavity up. One night we had a flood, came right down through the tent, and we had sleeping bags, and you'd reach out and push the mud around and send the water to the next fellow, and finally out the end of the tent. It was an experience.
Yeah. What was your job?
I was attached to a medical outfit.
Kind of like a MASH unit?
Yes, exactly like a MASH unit. It's called a field hospital. There were general hospitals, which were the big ones. And then there were special hospitals, and that was the lesser ones. And then there were the field medical units that on the battle line. And so that's what we ended up. We kept moving north on New Guinea, and ended up at, I thought I'd never forget it. Anyway, there were no towns. There was absolutely no sign of civilization in New Guinea. There wasn't a street post, there wasn't a Coca-Cola sign, there wasn't anything, just pygmies and snakes and a miserable climate. When we finally got shelters up and so on, you'd take your shoes off and put them by the side of your cot, army cot, and it'd be mold on them in the morning.
Was New Guinea infested with Japanese troops at that time?
Yeah, they were the top. They had made it. It's a big island, and they were a third of the way down, almost in sight of Australia. When we landed there, and then we made our way up about halfway, and with two camp. And MacArthur had maintained his headquarters in Sydney. And he decided that it was now time for him to get closer to the Philippines, and he elected to have his headquarters built on New Guinea. There was a center of the island. That's where he wanted it built. It was the easiest target in the world for the Japanese bombers. But that's where you had to be if you were General MacArthur. But how do you get there from the coast? A whole battalion of engineers took them, I don't know, about 3 weeks to build a 4-lane road out of crushed coral that they'd get out of the coastline, and I don't know how they broke it up, to build him a road. And one day, one of the lieutenants said, you want to go to headquarters? And I said, yeah, I'd kind of like to see it. And he said, well, you'll be the driver, and I've got to go up there and talk with some medics. And we went up and came back, and he said, what'd you have to eat? And I said, just ordinary stuff. Why? He said, his father was a West Point man, and so was he, this particular officer. He was just screaming mad at MacArthur. He said they had generals mess, that was the best menu, and then bird colonels down to majors, and then the third level. He said we had wine, we had fresh head lettuce, we had apple pie, we had ice cream, all flown in from Australia, because that's the way they wanted to eat. And this lieutenant was so roaring mad because we had been taking the wounded out of the island hopping thing going up, and we had people with their guts blown out and stuff. And what we really needed was Gerber's baby food, and we couldn't get it. So we took wire screen, like your house screens, and just made a wooden pistol out of it, and like a druggist pharmacist pistol, and whatever we had, we'd run through that screen to feed these guys. And he said, here we got all this T-bone steaks and head lettuce and twice baked potatoes and everything for the officers. A whole battalion that built that road canceled their war bonds. And General MacArthur had two Cadillac limousines and a house built for himself, his wife, their nanny, and their baby. The morale out there. One of the fellows was wounded and came into our place, and we were showing Pathé News, and it was a landing. MacArthur, with his pipe, was wading ashore. And this patient looked at me and he said, I was there. He said, that son of a bitch was safer than anybody that was crossing your main street in Cedar Rapids. He had so much overhead cover and so much tank ahead of him, but it was all made to look like if the big General MacArthur was leading his troops into battle. He said, if I ever got him in my sights in a Jap, I'd have a hell of a decision to make.
So what year were you discharged?
Well, I got what they call jungle rot 2.5 years later. And they were having trouble with it. They began to lose some patients with it. And they couldn't do anything about it. It was during that time that they drove me into the center to see this fellow. They said, it's never helping. And so finally the doctor said, we're going to send you home. Because we have never seen diseases like we have here. We don't have any medications for it. So I got sent back to San Francisco to Letterman General Hospital, and I was in 5 hospitals before I got discharged.
Then when you finally got back to Cedar Rapids and got your life back together again, halfway?
Well, I had been working at Souvenir for a short time.
Before you went to service?
Before I went to service. So I went right back there. And I don't know, a couple of years after that, my father-in-law died.
Your father-in-law owned the
He
souvenir
built
company.
it. That's another story.
What was
but,
his name?
Nobody had ever printed a rounded pencil before. And he found a very ingenious way of doing it. And he died, and I bought the company from the estate.
What was your father-in-law's name? I don't know if you mentioned that or not.
Archibald Campbell Stewart, a Scotchman. Came from a family of 12, and they had about 20 acres west of town and 12 kids and a couple of cows and stuff. It was tough. They couldn't have any shoes in the summer because they couldn't afford them, and they could do whatever they had to do barefoot.
That was a very innovative idea he had, putting advertising around the pencil. Did he ever tell you where he come upon that idea?
Okay. I had the machine, the quote machine. Don't I? I think I have a picture of it here. He never was a handyman of any kind, but he had some oak boards in the basement of his house on 4th Avenue and 14th Street at that time. And he was married and had 4 children. And so he took this oak and made a platform about this long and rails. And there was a cavity about 3 by 5. And he would put, it was just the depth of printer's type. And so he'd put the printer's type in there, and he'd put a pencil down and run it across the pen and then catch it. And then he had the same thing we had for Christmas tree candles strung across his basement on twine, but the candles were the same size as a pencil. And he'd take the printed pencil, stick it in there while the ink dried, and take it down later when it was dry. And he had a quart of shellac, and he'd dip the pencils in there and put them in a rack to dry and ship them. And his mother, a Scotch lady, when she heard that's what he was going to do, he had, in the earlier part of his life, he'd been a licensed undertaker. He was a licensed cheesemaker in a dairy factory. He sold automobiles in the first agency in Iowa, where Klinger's paint store used to be over on 2nd Avenue. He was a mortician. To anything to keep his family, until he got this idea. And so then he'd just go to the office supply store and ask them to get some pencils for him without Venus or whatever trademark on it, blanks. And they were all yellow. And that's how he started.
Yeah. Was he hoping you would probably someday take over the business? Did he ever say anything to you?
Was he what?
Did he ever, was he hoping that you would someday take over the business? Did he ever say anything to you?
My father had died, and we had to postpone the wedding. And from that point on, Archie Stewart just took me on like a son. Now, he had a son of his own, but because Archie had such a hardship upbringing, he wanted to do everything for his son that he couldn't do. So he indulged him. By that time, he was making a decent living, Archie was, and he sent him to Amherst College. And then he went on to Wall Street, the son did, with a prominent brokerage there. And then, 1929, it all crashed. And his son had married, and he couldn't find a job on Wall Street, so he came home to Daddy. And his dad had an office about 2/3 the size of this room, and he had a table and a desk in it for himself. So his son just took over the table and traded it for a desk, and his dad sat here and his son sat there, and he had access to his dad's secretary and had a credit card. Lived very, very well. Never was interested in the business. His mind was always on Wall Street. But then his dad said he wanted me to come into the business. And I said I never wanted to mix family and business. I've known a lot of it and never worked out very well. And he said, well, if ever there were two guys alike, it's you and me. And I said, yeah, but you got your son here. He said, he sits there and he draws a salary and he has a credit card. And he travels, but his mind's all on Wall Street. And so then my dad died and Archie died. And by that time he'd made it clear to me he'd like me to take over the business. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. He said, you know, Forrest isn't really interested in this, and it'll draw a decent price, and he'll sell out. Well, I wasn't convinced of that. We had an auditor by the name of Meltzer. His picture's right over there. And he'd been regional head of the IRS. And then he went into the private accounting business, auditing business, for Souvenir. And so I had him do my tax returns and that sort of thing. And he and I became very close friends. And working for Forrest Stewart, my brother-in-law, was just impossible. He thought everybody in the place was overpaid except himself. We didn't have a retirement plan, we didn't have a vacation plan, we didn't have hospital, medical, nothing. And so Mel said to me one day, he said, you better start looking for a job or buy this place. You and your brother-in-law will never be able to have a pleasant relationship. And I said, well, I'll start looking. And he said, well, before you do, talk about buying it. And I said, worth what? And he said, you don't know that you couldn't buy it. And I said, I know what my assets are, and it wouldn't buy the shingles on the roof. And he said, that has nothing to do with it. You don't know how much the bank could loan you to buy this. And I said, with hardly any collateral? And he said, do you know? He kept asking me these questions, to which I had, no, I don't know. And I said, well, I'm not going to ask Forrest to sell. You want to do it? He said, sure. So he asked him and put a big price on it. And I said, well, that's the end of that. And he said, no, not until we go over and talk with Mr. Coquelet at the bank. He was president of the Merchants National Bank then. And I said, okay. So we went over and walked into his office by appointment, and Coquelet said, I understand you want to buy a Souvenir. And I said, well, I'd like to, but I don't have the money. He said, I know why you want to sell. He had, Forrest Stewart had been put on the Merchants Board by John Hamilton, who was grandson of the founder of the bank. He said, I got that son of a bitch on my board, and I wouldn't want to work for him for a day. And he said, he'll ask you too much for it. Pay him. 10 years from now, it won't make any difference. And I thought, that's the first time I ever heard a banker talk like that. But he did, and by gosh, he gave him the money. And Stewart took it and left. And then I got a retirement plan in due time. Melch helped me set it up, and hospital, medical, and all those things. And we really grew it, and won the highest awards in the industry for on-time delivery and freedom from complaints and all those kinds of things. And giving the employees vacation time and medical insurance and so on. We had wonderful morale. And all the retirees started a breakfast club. Meets the first Tuesday in every month out at the country kitchen. And I had an old friend of mine that I'd grown up with, Ronnie Moore, who had that office right there till he died. He was my CFO. After he retired, he came over here. And we just had a wonderful spirit and a lot of fun running the company. And everything went splendidly until the British came along and wanted to buy it.
What year did you buy this?
But about 48, 50.
58, maybe?
48 or 50.
48 or 50?
Yeah, somewhere. Okay. After the war.
At your peak, how many employees do you suppose you...
We had 125.
125 employees. And what made you decide that you would sell it to the British because of a good price they offered you? Or?
Well, they had a good... I didn't want to retire. Never wanted to retire. But an old friend of mine, one of the deans of the industry, Dean Matthews, was president of Brown and Bigelow, who were up in St. Paul. And he had gotten to know a fellow by the name of David Wigglesworth, who owned Bemrose. And they got to know each other because the most expensive thing in the calendar business is the art. And Brown Bigelow had a warehouse full of their art. You know, you can't run it twice, very much of it. And Bemrose were the Brown and Bigelow of the UK, and they had the same thing, art. So Bemrose came over and talked with Dean Matthews. Wigglesworth came over and talked with Dean Matthews. Wigglesworth was a grandson of Bemrose, but he told him his idea. He said, "We got a lot of art, you got a lot of art. None of your people in America have seen ours, and none of our people in the UK have seen yours. Let's trade art. And we'll send you an inventory of everything we have, and you send us, and we'll borrow back and forth." And they became very good friends. So Dean Matthews and his wife were then on a holiday, and they spent a weekend with the Wigglesworths, and sitting in front of the fire one night having a brandy and a cigar. David Wigglesworth said, "You know anything in America in our business is for sale, calendar company or something?" And Dean said, "No, but why would you want to be in a calendar business? You don't know about the calendar business in America." And he said, "Yes, I do. I've got a sister over there, and you got calendars hanging everywhere like we do." And Dean said, "Well, that's a very mature business in our industry, and I couldn't recommend that you get into it because the only way you'll grow it is by acquisition." And so David said to Dean, "Well, do you know anything else for sale?" Well, Dean was pretty sure I was for sale because neither of my sons were interested in it, and I was getting along. And so he said, "I think I know a writing instrument. I'm not sure they want to sell out to the British, but Dean didn't know my connection to the British through my mother." Anyway, so Wigglesworth came over. He said, "Go back and find out if he'd be willing." And I told Dean, I'm glad to talk with him. And we did. And made a deal. It was one of the most fun parts of my life because David Wigglesworth and I just got along like that. And I said, "If we make this deal, I'll be out of here before the ink's dry." And he said, no, you won't. I said, what do you mean I won't? He said, I want you to stay on and help me build a conglomerate over here, and you've been in the industry for 40 years, and you know everybody of importance in it, and you help me buy some companies. You put together a combination of companies that you think economically long range would make a good, sound business. And I said, well, that sounds like fun. And so I did. And
So he kind of
came over
hired
here and got this office, and we began buying businesses
So he kind of hired you back on contract.
as a consultant.
Yes,
That's where that damn name came from on the door.
What a terrific job.
I'm not going to give you a title in the business, vice president.
Well, what year was this that the British company bought you out then?
That was never any good.
84, 1984?
Was it in the 80s?
1984?
That'd be about that.
1984. Okay.
Yeah.
So you found yourself without a company, and I think you took off and started doing charitable type, volunteer type work.
Well, afterwards I sold the business. Connie and I sat down, and I had taken her with me to the University of New York Buffalo campus, where they had a 1-week course in the summer called Creative Problem Solving, and we went, and I sent all my executives, all of them, I only had 4, but all of them to it over time. It was such a great investment, and so Connie went with me, and you lived in a dorm just like you were a student in the college. You ate in the cafeteria and went to class and all that, but they did have a creative way of problem solving. So when I sold the company, Connie said, well, after dinner, let's sit down and use some of what we learned at creative problem solving. What are we going to do with our lives now? Because I could have been a consultant and lived anywhere in the United States. And Connie had lived more years of her life here than she had in Rockford, Illinois, where she was born. And I had lived all of my life here. And so to shorten the story, we said, well, we are very, very close with our internist and our dentist, and with her doctor, and all those things. And we have our friends here, we have our lawyer here, our bank here. They aren't very portable. Why would we want to leave? All of our friends who have second homes or who have moved and retired ended up trying to make a life out of taking pictures or raising roses or playing golf or fishing or something. That's not for you. And I said, no, it isn't. So we didn't. And I got this office. It happened to be exactly the size and shape of the one I had Souvenir, and I took the pictures off the wall over there and put them right where they were. And everything here just, I had a little kitchenette and half bath at the end of the hall, just like we had over there. And we wanted just to work on humanitarian things, humanitarian boards, humanitarian fundraisers, and that kind of thing. And I've had great time.
I have a article here I think I took out of the newspaper sometime back. Over the years, Mr. Yaw has served on the boards of the YMCA, the YWCA, Cornell College, Cedar Rapids Country Club, Cedar Rapids Community Theater, Cedar Rapids Symphony, and the St. Luke's Foundation. He was the first president of the St. Luke's Foundation and one of the founders of the NU Community Appeal, which later became the United Way. And I've also seen in different articles that you have been labeled as a philanthropist. And
Well, that's a little exaggerated. We try and support. When I was at Souvenir, we supported it. We gave $75,000 to get the symphony going over here. We gave everything that was good for Cedar Rapids. I didn't have that kind of means, but when they needed money to rehab the Paramount Theater. We gave to that, but we give pretty generously annually to the Salvation Army, because my auditor said that's the most efficient charity in America. They have the lowest operating costs, and 93 cents out of every dollar they get goes to their cause. And then we gave a souvenir, gave a sizable chunk, I think it was about $100,000, when we had a $14 million campaign for the 2 hospitals and split every dollar and 50 cents each way. And I was on that board for 20 years, the hospital, not the foundation. And then one day we would get checks of $100, $500 or whatever from patients whose lives they thought had been saved and they wanted to do something. Gave us money and just put it in the bank. Nobody, I don't think the board really knew whatever happened to that money, but one time I said, you know, we're not in the money management business, we're not in the money raising business, and if we don't set something up to manage that money, to get a return on our investment and so on, we could be looking like pretty foolish. And so that's when we started. Well, what would you do? And I said, a foundation. So we set up the St. Luke's Foundation. And they said, well, what was your idea? You do it. So I did. And we had a powerful board and have done wonderful things and still do there. And the YMCA has been part of my life. I'm the oldest continuous member in Cedar Rapids of the YMCA. My father took me there when I was 5 years old in 1918 and put me in the polywog class to learn to swim. And I've been there ever since, except when I was in New Guinea. But those are the things we enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Connie works at the hospital.
Yeah, a philanthropist can also be described as a person who very freely gives of himself and of his time. You spend an awful lot of hours with this community type work. Is this a trait that you probably inherited from your folks, or is this something you picked up because of the great success that you had within the community?
Well, it started, my dad, even though he was gone all week, so to speak, was very active in the church. That's how we got to be friends with A.L. Kelly and Bob Armstrong. I still go up to the hospital and see Esther every Sunday and take the church men or bulletin up to him or to her. They were very, very dear friends. And when my mother was dying, we lived a half a block from them, and Esther was down there every day with my mother and take down some cookies or cake or pie or whatever. And I just grew up in that.
Brewer, Mr. Brewer, of the Brewer and Wick, the authors. Can you tell us, did you know a Mr. Brewer personally? That
Luther Brewer?
Luther Brewer, yes.
That starts with another interesting story. One of the most sought-after jobs when I was in high school, Old Washington High School, was to chauffeur for Mrs. John T. Hamilton, whose husband founded the Merchants National Bank. And the job was open, so I applied for it. And I remember every time I go in the bank now, John T. had died, old John T. And his son, James E. Hamilton, was the president, and he was in the corner of 2nd Avenue and 3rd Street office there. And I stood out in the lobby and my knees were shaking because he did all the hiring for his mother, and he was known as a pretty gruff and disciplinarian and so on. But I went in, and then to shorten the story, I got the job. And then, of course, she died. I got dozens of stories of things that she told me that she never should have. then she died, and Luther Brewer position became open. So I applied for that, and I was in high school, and he was one of the brightest lights of my life. I learned so much from him. He was extremely well educated, extremely cultured man, well read, and he belonged to the National Shakespearean Society. And he got the idea that an awful lot was attributed to Shakespeare that he had not written. And the other members of that board said, Luther, do you think that there could be a lot of literature out there that's got Shakespeare's name on it, and that nobody had ever found out about it until you? We're beginning to wonder if you've got all your pennies. Well, he was determined, and he traveled the world back when you didn't fly. It was all by ship. And he was in Rome, and whenever he was in one of the big cities over there, he went to one of the oldest bookstores. He loved to browse in bookstores. And he picked up a book and began fanning through it, and a piece of paper fell out on the floor, and he picked it up, and there was the proof. A fellow by the name of Marlowe had written a lot and put Shakespeare's name to it. And so that started Luther collecting Marlowe's books. And by the time before Luther died, he had all but one, and he knew where that was, and that fellow wanted a pirate's ransom for it. I don't need it. I know where it is, and I've got my collection done. And so came time to, Luther's wife died. He had a library, and I think you're old enough to remember the shoe stores when we were kids that had a ladder, and they'd climb up the ladder and get out the size of the shoe you wanted. He had a library like that, and it was a 14-foot ceiling, and he had read every book in it, and it was bigger than this room, and there were library books on the 3 walls of it. And he smoked a meerschaum pipe, and he always carried 2, one that he had in his mouth, and one was to refill after he burned this one out. And it was a ceremony. He carried them in chamois bags. But his wife sat in the back seat, and he sat in the front, told me where we wanted to go. He wanted to travel the side roads in the fall and so on, and down to Iowa City to his fraternity and have dinner on Sunday. And I just learned so much from that man about culture and the world and the importance of culture to a community. He was a great writer, great publisher. He had a more international newspaper than the Gazette. That's changed a lot lately, but Luther knew the world, most of it, not much of Asia, but it was a blessing to have spent some years with that man.
He probably helped you or showed you how to conduct yourself as a gentleman amongst your business peers or amongst business people.
Oh, yeah, he was a. If Hollywood had cast him as a wonderful publisher, a wonderful collector, a wonderful man, a wonderful community man, you'd have thought it was overcast. Yeah. He was every inch a gentleman, and she was every inch a lady, and his friends were George B. Douglas and Judge Grimm and people like that. And Mrs. Hamilton used to take Mrs. Douglas and Mrs. Grimm and some of the other widows for a ride. So I would sit in the front. I had to wear, it could be a 90-degree day, I had to wear a jacket and a cap and gloves. But they talked freely in the back seat about all. So, do you remember when old George B. and so on? And I just listened. I could have had a lot of lawsuits. I could have inspired a lot of lawsuits from that. And Jim Hamilton's Mrs. Hamilton called me up when she didn't want to go for a ride. She called me up to her bedroom and had me read to her. It was one of those days she got a little tired of reading. And she said, I got a note I want you to take down to Jimmy. It was James E. Hamilton, the president of the bank. And I said, fine, you want to do it now? And she said, well, first you got to know where to find him. And I said, well, I know where to find him. I know where his office is. He said, he isn't there. And I said, what do you mean he isn't there? And she said, well, it's 2 o'clock. You go downtown and you go in the back row of the Palace, the Isis, or the Rialto. That's where you'll be every afternoon, the president of the bank. She took me up to the ballroom on the 3rd floor and showed me all these naval uniforms. He went to Annapolis, but he flunked out, and his father pulled all the influence cords he could. He never got back.
Did you know Mr. Arthur Collins?
Grew up with. He was a little older than I.
Same neighborhood or?
Hmm?
Same neighborhood or?
Yeah, we were a block apart, and he had a dog. Or his father had a dog, a hunting dog, pointer, and it used to spend more of its time at my house because I liked to play with it, and there wasn't anybody there. Art was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years older than I was, but I knew Art about as well as anybody, and he was. His father asked Archie Stewart if what he thought of Amherst College, if you got your sons going there, what do you think about it? And Stewart said, well, I don't know much about it. My son found it, and he's going there, and I think he's getting a good education, and he seems to like it, and so on. And he said, I checked it out and found out it was one of the better small men-only colleges, and so on. Why? He said, well, I think I want to send Art there. So he did. And at the end of the first year, Art came back. Do you want some hot coffee? Art came back and said, Dad, you can send me back there next year, but I won't get there. And his father said, why would you say that, son? It's because I know more about what I want to know than they do. His dad said, son, I can't think of a more important reason to go back. You're going to go back. So he did for the second year. He came back at the end of that and he said, if you do that again, I will get off the train and you will hear from me sometime after that. And he knew that if Art said that he'd do it, so he didn't make him go. But then he came back and he'd always been interested in shortwave. And I don't think you fellows will remember, but back in those days you could buy a crystal, which was the heart of a dime store, Woolworths, whatever. And he bought a crystal, and he got his mother's oatmeal box and wrapped it with a copper wire and made a coil. And I don't know anything about it, but he made a shortwave two-way communication out of it, and he had it up in his attic on Beaver Avenue. And he was just a kid. He was going to Washington High School. And one night he picked up an SOS from the bird expedition to the South Pole. Have you heard the story? And their communication was KDKA Pittsburgh, but they couldn't get them to the South Pole on that night. And so Art relayed it to KDKA. As it turned out, it saved a man's life. Well, as I say, Art was going to high school, and Bird came through. We didn't have an auditorium at Old Washington High School, so we met in what was then the Strand Theater right across. It's a religious thing took it over, but that's where we had our meetings, school-wide meetings. And Admiral Byrd came through and gave a speech. And after it was over, we went back to school with Malcolm Hallman, who was the president, or the principal of Washington High School. And he said, well, I got one thing to do before I leave town. And Hallman said, what's that? And he said, I want to meet Mr. Arthur Collins. he's a shortwave radio manufacturer here. And Hallman said, "You want to meet Arthur Collins?" And he said, "Yes." Went down the hall, went into the classroom until the teacher sent Art out. Said, "Meet Admiral Byrd."
Wow.
And later he got his first factory going out there on First Avenue, about 28th Street, and became the maker of the finest shortwave broadcasting stuff. He sold police departments, fire departments, government agencies, and so on. Well, the war came on. So he said, "Well, maybe we can help." So he went to Washington. He'd never been to Washington. So he wrote and got an appointment with the Navy. And he walked into this admiral's office. And the admiral was sitting with his feet on the desk. "Yeah, young man." Never quit cleaning his fingernails, never took his feet off the desk. Art said, "I'm Arthur Collins from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We make shortwave, two-wave equipment. Got a war going on, thought maybe if we could help, we'd like to." "Yeah." He said, "Just leave your card, and if we ever need whatever you make, we'll get in touch with you." Art turned around, walked to the door, trying to think of the worst thing he could possibly say. Got to the door, opened it, and he turned around and he said, "Listen, you son of a bitch, I know just what you think. We're a bunch of Indians, and we have one thing in common with them. We never forget. And if you ever want anything from us, call the Army." He didn't have any reason to say it at all, and walked out. And he went over and got an appointment with the commanding officer of the Signal Corps. It was just the opposite. He said, "I don't know who you are, where you come from, but we've got a war going on, and we need all the help we can get." And Art says, "Well, what's your current most important?" Well, he said, "Air-to-ground transportation or communication." And the general, or Art said, "What do you have now?" And he said, "Well, we got something that's about 4 feet cubic, 3 dials on it, and it weighs 100 pounds. We got to get it simpler and lighter weight somehow. Think you can do that?" And Art said, "Give me all the specifications of what you had and so on, and you'll hear from me." A couple of weeks later, Art was back in his office, and he had one 12 inches cubic, 1 dial, and 100 units of power instead of 25, and it weighed 25 pounds. And from then on, the Signal Corps got everything Collins could make, and they won 3 Army Navy E's. Art wouldn't even go down to the Roosevelt Hotel to receive him. Sent one of his executives down. That stage is not for me. And his life just went like that thereafter. But then his dad was his CFO, and it was a good thing because Art didn't know anything about taking care of that part of the business. And his dad kept getting telephone calls. The switchboard did for his dad. And you know what they'd call him, Mr. Collins there. And they'd tell him who was calling, and it'd be the Navy. And they said, "No, I'm sorry, he's not here." Well, that went on for quite a while, and finally his secretary came in and said, "There's a gentleman out here who wants to see you." And he said, "Does he have an appointment?" He said, "No." He said, "Who is he?" I don't remember his name. Well, his name is Mr. Brown. But he said, "It's personal." He said, "Is any Brown we know?" "Not that I know." "Well, bring him in." And he walked in in his civilian clothes, and he said, "Mr. Collins, I'm here under assumed. I'm Admiral so-and-so." It was the one that Art had met in Washington. And he said, "We got a hell of a problem. We got a war going on, and we need your help." and we can't get our phone calls returned. Our people can't get by besides your reception desk. We can't get our mail answered. What the hell's wrong? And our dad said, MH was his name. MH said, well, Admiral, I don't think I can help you, but I'll tell you a story. And he told him the story. And the Admiral said, oh, that was your son. Yes, and he said he was right. We do have Indian-type memories. And if you want anything from us, go see the Army Signal Corps.
Good. Dr. Lippisch, a German aeronautical scientist, ended up at Collins Radio. Did you ever have the opportunity to meet the man?
He was one of my closest friends.
Was he really?
Yeah. Alex was German, of course, and brilliant. And Hitler knew what he had, so he wanted him working on aviation matters, and so he kept moving him back from the front. And he had developed the Delta Wing. Do you know what that is?
Yes.
And he was in Vienna, which was where he'd been born, but it just happened that was where Hitler had brought him back to until they'd have to back up farther. And so he wanted to escape. And he got the idea, and I asked him one time to explain it to me, and I couldn't understand it at all, but if he could find a certain model of Mercedes, he could make charcoal and it'd run on charcoal. And I'm not at all mechanical. But he finally found a Mercedes like that, and he started towards Switzerland. And he'd make the charcoal by night and drive by day. And he got to Switzerland and gave himself up. And they said, if you're who you say you are, we got to get rid of you fast because the German will be after you. And are you the man who developed the Delta Wing? Yes, I am. Well, they said, we're going to ship you to England, right? We're going to spirit you out of here and get you to England. And so they did. And the British got a hold of him. Well, they had just had some escapees from Hitler's people that had gone ashore in the UK, and a special unit of the German army came over and captured them and took them home. And the British said, we can't have you hanging around here. They'll come over here and get you the same way. They'll know where you are. So they sent him over to the United States, and they wanted to be sure he was who he said he was. So they put him in a prisoner of war camp in New Jersey until they satisfied themselves that he really was the Alex Lippisch. And
Werner von Braun, maybe?
Von Braun was a classmate of Alex's, and they'd grown up together. Well, to shorten the story, New Jersey prison camp sent him to Collins with an order from the United States government that Art should give him all the space, all the tools, and all the money he needed, that he was going to develop a vertical rising, horizontal flying aircraft for the government. That's how he got here.
Yeah. Did you ever have the opportunity to socialize with Alex? Did you ever have the opportunity to socialize with Alex?
Oh, a lot. Yeah.
Was he? Did he have a sense of humor, or was he all?
Tremendous sense of humor. Tremendous sense of humor. But boy, did I learn a lot from that man. Not aviation-wise. But one of the most interesting stories I have that revealed him, Dr. Greenblatt and I and Bill Whipple were all in the same kindergarten class together. And Jerry Greenblatt and I grew up closer than brothers, built houses next to each other, raised kids together and all that. Went fishing together. And our first son was his first patient. That was a storybook relationship. His son thought he wanted to be a doctor. I don't think he did, but he thought he ought to want one. So Jerry sent him to a fine medical school in St. Louis, and he came home mid-year at Christmas time, and he said, "Dad, I'm going to break your heart." And he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I don't want to be a doctor." Jerry said, "Well, that isn't going to break my heart. It disappoints me, but if you don't want to be, you shouldn't be because you couldn't be. You got to want to be a doctor. What do you want to be?" He said, "I want to be a marine engineer." And Jerry turned to me and he said, "Where's the best marine engineering school in the country?" And I said, "I haven't any idea, but I think I know where I can find out." Well, he said, "Do it." So I called Alex and I said, "How much difference is there between aerodynamics and hydrodynamics?" And, "Yeah, not so much, Vi." And so I told him the story, and "Where's the best school?" And he said, "University of Michigan." And I said, "You answered that awfully fast, Alex." And he said, "Well, it's the best goddamn school." And so that's where Jeff ended up. But he came home for a holiday, and he said, "Uncle Bob, I never met Dr. Lippisch, and I sure am indebted to him. Can you arrange a meeting?" And I said, "Sure." And Jerry said, "Count me in," because he'd never met him. So Alex was great. We came over for tea, and his wife, Ruth, whom he had met and married in Germany, and he had tea and cookies and stuff. And Jerry said to Alex, "Dr. Lippisch, I understand you're credited with being the #1 aerodynamics authority in the world." "Yeah, some people think so, I guess." I said, "Where did you get the idea of the delta wing?" "From God." And Jerry said, "From God?" "Yeah, doctor, you know, that's where all the good ideas come from." "Tell me more about it. Would you like to see that? He said, "How did God communicate with you?" And he said, "I tell you." And he disappeared, and there'd been his chicken coop out beside his house before they owned it. He turned it into a little laboratory and go out there at night and invent things. And he came back with a shoebox. And he said to Greenblatt, "Have you ever seen a Indonesian cucumber plant?" And Jerry said, "I don't think so." "Would you like to?" He said, "I'm beginning to think I would." So he opened the box and he took this seed out of there. It was this shape, about that size. The seed was in the center, and this was a translucent fibrous material. He says, "Doctor, the Indonesian cucumber plant grows like this, and the seeds are up in there. If they drop to the ground like all seeds do, it'd be no more Indonesian cucumbers because they'd not have the sunshine and you would have no more plants." And Jerry said, So he picked one of these seeds up and let it go out across the living room floor, and it got about this far from the floor, and it traveled like this and settled. "That's the delta wing, doctor."
Good. We got 6 minutes left.
Okay.
I would you like to show a picture of your wife and children in closing?
There's a picture.
I think
of my
that'd be
wife.
appropriate.
And
Can you bring them over here so we can hold them up? Or,
sure.
Bob, we're running short of time here. We have 6 minutes left, and I'd like you to introduce your wife. Could you show us a photo of her?
This is my wife, Connie. She was born and raised in Rockford, Illinois. And and then went to school, to college over there in Chicago to work, and she met a young medic and married him, and it's a long story, but they came out here, and he became one of the most noted internal medicine professionals in town, and then he died prematurely of a carota problem that was in his family. His father died of it, and his brother did. And we knew each other socially, and my wife and I had a problem that we went for professional help for quite a long time, and the last consultant we had said, you've got an oil and water mix, why don't you admit it and get on with your lives, because the lives you're living are very instant. And we did, and later Connie and I were married.
Could you show us your boys?
We had 2 sons. They had 2 sons, and we did. And the boys grew up together, so we were very close. And this is my oldest son, and this is my youngest son. And the oldest one is a venture capitalist based in Sarasota, Florida.
Sarasota?
But he spends about a third of his time on Wall Street and about another third in Europe, Eastern or Western Europe. But and his brother is in the office systems business in Boston, and they had sort of interesting lives. We don't have time for now, but the oldest one ended up working for Salomon Brothers in New York, became vice president of venture capital there, and had quite a fabulous career there. And then when Billy Salomon died, he left and with 2 of his associates started venture capital of his own, and that's what he's doing now.
Robert, this has been a very enjoyable interview, and the Cedar Rapids Historical Society, the Linn County Historical Society, would like to thank you very much for sharing your memories with us. Thank you again.
Well, it's always fun to reminisce.
Thank you very much.
That's where I have the greatest treasure in my life outside of my family is the friends I've made.
Thank you.